When the sun sets and the world sleeps, some walk through empty halls and endless corridors, their footsteps echoing in the darkness. Welcome to Mr. Shadow's Stories, where the night never ends and every shadow holds a secret. I'm your guide through the darkness, and tonight I have 3 tales that will make you question everything you thought you knew about working alone at night. These aren't just stories, these are real accounts from real people who clocked in for what they thought would be just another shift, but discovered that some buildings never truly empty. Some nights never truly end, and sometimes you're not as alone as you think you are. So turn off your lights, put on your headphones, and prepare yourself, because once you hear these stories, you'll never look at a warehouse the same way again. Story 1: The Footsteps in Aisle 12. Our first story comes from Marcus, a 28-year-old warehouse worker in Oregon. Marcus had been working the night shift at a massive distribution center for about 6 months when this incident occurred. The facility was enormous, over 200,000 square feet of storage, with aisles stretching so far into the distance that the overhead lights at the far end looked like tiny stars. Marcus always arrived at 11 p.m., just as the day shift was finishing up. By midnight, he'd be completely alone, responsible for inventory checks and preparing orders for the morning trucks. He'd grown comfortable with the solitude. In fact, he preferred it. No small talk, no drama, just him and his work. But comfort can be dangerous. It makes you let your guard down. It was a Tuesday night in October, unseasonably cold for Oregon. Marcus had just finished his first sweep of the north section when he heard it. Footsteps. Clear, deliberate footsteps coming from somewhere in the middle aisles. He stopped, his scanning gun held loosely in his hand, and listened. The footsteps continued. They weren't hurried or panicked. They were steady, methodical, like someone who knew exactly where they were going. Marcus called out, "Hello, Jerry, is that you?" Jerry was the security guard who sometimes made rounds, though he usually stayed in the guard shack watching monitors. No response, just those footsteps getting closer. Marcus felt his first real twinge of unease. The warehouse had excellent acoustics. If someone was there, they would have heard him. He started walking toward the sound, following it down the main corridor toward aisle 12. The footsteps seemed to stay just ahead of him, always one aisle over, always just out of sight. "This isn't funny," Marcus called out, his voice sounding smaller than he'd intended. "If someone's here, you need to identify yourself." The footsteps stopped. The silence that followed was somehow worse than the sound had been. Marcus stood in the middle of the corridor, his heart pounding, listening to nothing but the gentle hum of the refrigerating units in the distance. He pulled out his phone and called the security desk. "Jerry, you in the building?" Marcus asked when the guard picked up. "Nah, man, I'm in the shack. Why, everything okay?" "I'm hearing footsteps. Can you check the cameras?" There was a pause, then the sound of Jerry typing. "I'm looking at the feeds now. I see you. But Marcus, there's nobody else in that building. All the doors are secure. Nobody's come in or out since the day shift left." Marcus's skin crawled. "Jerry, I'm telling you, someone's here. I heard them clear as day." "Look, stay where you are. I'm coming in." Marcus stood frozen in place, his eyes scanning the aisles around him. The warehouse felt different now, oppressive, watching. The overhead lights seemed dimmer, the shadows between the shelves deeper and darker. He kept his phone in his hand, the screen light a small comfort in the vast space. That's when he heard them again, the footsteps, but this time they were running, Fast, heavy footsteps coming straight towards him from aisle 12. Marcus spun around, his phone light sweeping across the opening of the aisle, but he saw nothing. The footsteps stopped right at the end of the aisle, right where he was standing. He should have seen whoever was making that sound. They would have been right in front of him. But there was nothing but empty air and the faint smell of cardboard and dust. "Marcus!" Jerry's voice came from behind him, and Marcus nearly jumped out of his skin. The guard had entered through the south entrance, flashlight in hand. "What's going on?" Marcus tried to explain, but the words came out jumbled and panicked. Jerry listened, his expression growing more serious, and then he did something that made Marcus's blood run cold. He pointed his flashlight on the floor. There, in the thin layer of dust that accumulated on the concrete despite regular cleaning, were footprints. Fresh footprints. They led from aisle 12, stopped right where Marcus was standing, and then they just ended, as if whoever made them had simply vanished into thin air. Jerry and Marcus searched the entire warehouse that night. They found nothing. No intruder, no explanation, no logical reason for those footprints. The security footage showed exactly what Jerry had said. Marcus was alone in that building. The cameras never caught any movement except his own. But here's the part that still haunts Marcus to this day. When they reviewed the audio feed from the security system, they heard them too. The footsteps running towards Marcus, and then just as they stopped, there was another sound on the recording, a sound that Marcus swears he didn't hear in person. A whisper right where those footprints ended. Just 2 words, barely audible. "Found you." Marcus quit the next day. He never went back to that warehouse. And when the company tried to find someone else to work that shift, they discovered something interesting in the building's records. 8 years earlier, a night shift worker had died in that warehouse. Heart attack, they said. He collapsed in aisle 12 and wasn't found until the morning. His name was also Marcus.
Story 2. The Loading Dock.
Our second story takes place in Michigan at an automotive parts warehouse on the outskirts of Detroit. This comes from a woman named Sarah, who was 23 at the time and desperately needed the extra money that night shifts provided. She was saving for college, working 4 nights a week from midnight to 8 a.m. The warehouse wasn't as large as Marcus's, but it had something that made it infinitely worse: a loading dock that faced an abandoned lot. During the day, it was just an empty field with some overgrown grass and a few broken-down cars that nobody had bothered to tow away. But at night, Sarah said it felt like the darkness in that lot was somehow deeper, thicker than it should be. Sarah's job was simple: receive late-night deliveries, check the inventory, and store everything in the proper locations. Most nights, she'd get 2 or 3 trucks between 1 and 5 a.m. The rest of the time, she'd be organizing stock and preparing orders for the morning shift. The incident happened on a Thursday night in March. Sarah had already processed 1 delivery and was waiting for the second truck, which was running late. She sat in the small office adjacent to the loading dock, scrolling through her phone, when she heard the distinct sound of the loading dock door opening. She looked up at the monitor that showed the dock area. The door was indeed opening, a metal rattling as it went up. Sarah frowned. The door was automatic, but it only opened when a truck triggered the sensor or when someone pressed the button inside the office. She hadn't pressed it, and she couldn't see any truck. Sarah got up and walked to the dock area, clipboard in hand. The door was fully open now, revealing the dark lot beyond. The security lights barely penetrated that darkness, creating a sharp line between the lit dock and the shadows outside. Hello? Sarah called out. Truck 47? Is that you? Nothing. Just the cold March wind blowing through the open door, bringing with it the smell of old motor oil and rain. Sarah grabbed the button to close the door, but before she could press it, she saw something that made her freeze. Out in the lot, maybe 30 feet from the dock, someone was standing, just standing there, perfectly still, facing the warehouse. The figure was too far into the shadows to make out clearly, but Sarah could see the basic shape. Tall, definitely male, wearing what looked like a dark coat or jacket. Her mouth felt dry. "Can I help you?" Sarah called out, trying to sound authoritative despite the fear creeping up her spine. "This is private property. You need to leave." The figure didn't move, didn't respond, just stood there, watching. Sarah's hand found her phone, and she quickly dialed the non-emergency police number. As she explained the situation to the dispatcher, she kept her eyes on the figure. It still hadn't moved, not even a little. It was like looking at a statue. The dispatcher told her officers were on their way and advised her to stay inside and keep the door closed. Sarah agreed and reached for the button again, but as her finger touched it, the figure moved. It didn't walk, it didn't run, it moved forward in a way that Sarah struggles to describe even now. She says it was like watching someone in a video game glitch. The figure was 30 feet away, then it was 20 feet away, then it was 10 feet away, not moving between those points, but simply appearing at them, getting closer with each impossible jump. Sarah slammed the button, and the door started to descend, but it moved so slowly, so impossibly slowly. The figure was halfway down. The figure raised one arm, reaching towards the gap. Sarah saw its hand, if you could call it a hand, long fingers that seemed to have too many joints, moving in ways that fingers shouldn't move. The door was 3/4 down. The figure's arm came under it, those impossible fingers stretching towards Sarah. She stumbled backward, tripping over a pallet and falling hard on the concrete. Her clipboard clattered across the floor. The door sealed shut with a heavy thud. The loading dock was silent, except for Sarah's ragged breathing. She lay on the cold floor for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. When she finally found the courage to stand up, she looked at the monitor that showed the outside of the dock. The lot was empty. The figure was gone. The police arrived 20 minutes later. They searched the lot and found nothing. No footprints, no signs that anyone had been there. But they did find something strange. The sensor that triggered the dock door to open? It was broken, had been broken for weeks according to the maintenance logs. The only way that door should have opened is if someone pressed the button inside the office. But Sarah never pressed that button. She finished out her 2-week notice, but refused to work alone after that night. The company had to put 2 people on the night shift, and Sarah made sure she was never the one responsible for the loading dock. She quit 3 months later and moved back in with her parents, abandoning her college plans that fall. She says she still has nightmares about that hand, those fingers that bent in too many places, reaching for her under the descending door. And sometimes, late at night, she wakes up convinced she can smell old motor oil and rain, and she has to check that all her doors and windows are locked, because she knows, deep down, that whatever that thing was, it didn't just vanish. It's still out there, waiting in the darkness, watching.
Story 3: The Night Inventory. Our final story comes from James, a shift supervisor at a furniture warehouse in Texas. James was 35, a veteran of night shift work with over 10 years of experience. He'd worked in warehouses across 3 states and prided himself on being unshakable. He'd dealt with everything from break-ins to equipment failures to finding homeless people sleeping in the back corners of facilities. Nothing rattled him. Until the night of the inventory. Once a quarter, James had to conduct a complete inventory check. This meant going through every single item in the massive warehouse, scanning barcodes and verifying quantities. It was tedious work that usually took about 6 hours. James preferred to do it on Sunday nights when there were no deliveries scheduled and he could work without interruption. This particular Sunday in late November started normally enough. James arrived at 10 p.m., grabbed his scanner and tablet, and began the systematic process of working through each section. The warehouse held everything from small decorative items to massive sectional sofas, organized in a grid pattern that covered nearly 3 acres. He'd been working for about 2 hours, making his way through the bedroom furniture section, when he noticed something odd. One of the display beds, a queen-sized with an ornate wooden headboard, had been disturbed. The pillows were arranged differently than they had been during his last inventory. It wasn't unusual for day shift workers to move things around, but something about this felt off. The bedspread was wrinkled, like someone had been lying on it. James made a note on his tablet and moved on. But 3 aisles over, he found another display bed that looked slept in, and then another, and another. 5 beds in total, all in the same section, all showing signs of recent use. He pulled out his phone and called the day shift supervisor. "Hey, Tom, did anyone mention anything weird happening today? Some of the display beds look like people have been sleeping in them." "Sleeping in them? No, man, nothing like that. We had a pretty quiet day. Why?" James explained what he was seeing. Tom promised to check with his team and get back to him. James continued his inventory, but now he was paying closer attention to his surroundings. The warehouse felt different. The air seemed heavier, harder to breathe. That's when he heard it, a creaking sound like weight shifting on a mattress. It came from somewhere behind him, back in the section he'd just finished checking. James turned around slowly, his scanner held in front of him like a weapon. "If someone's in here, you need to show yourself right now. This is private property and the police have already been notified." That last part was a lie, but James figured it might scare off any intruders. The creaking stopped. The silence that followed was absolute. No humming machinery, no wind, no ambient noise at all. It was like the warehouse was holding its breath. James started walking back toward the section where he'd found the disturbed beds. His footsteps echoed strangely, bouncing off the high ceiling in a way that made it sound like multiple people were walking. He turned the corner into the aisle with the first bed he'd noticed. Someone was lying on it. James felt his heart stop. The figure was covered with the bedspread, only a vague human shape visible underneath the fabric. It wasn't moving, wasn't breathing that he could see, just lying there, perfectly still. "Hey!" James' voice cracked. "Get up, now!" The figure didn't move. James approached slowly, his phone in his hand, ready to call 911. As he got closer, he noticed something that made his skin crawl. The bedspread wasn't moving, not even the tiny movements you'd expect from breathing. Whatever was under there wasn't breathing. He reached out with the corner of his scanner and gently pulled back the bedspread. The fabric slid off easily, pooling on the floor. The bed was empty. There was no one there, but the mattress was compressed, deeply indented, as if something heavy had been lying on it just seconds before. James backed away, his breath coming in short gasps. He turned to leave the aisle and found himself face to face with another covered figure. This one was sitting upright on a different display bed, the bedspread draped over its head and shoulders like a shroud. It was no more than 5 feet away from him. James screamed. He actually screamed, something he hadn't done since he was a child. He stumbled backwards, tripping over his own feet, and fell hard against a shelving unit. The covered figure didn't move. Fighting every instinct telling him to run, James grabbed his scanner and threw it at the bedspread. The scanner hit the bedspread and passed right through, clattering on the floor behind the bed. There was nothing there, nothing solid anyway, but the bedspread was still shaped like something was under it, still sitting upright, still facing him. James ran. He ran through the aisles, his tablet forgotten, heading for the exit. Behind him, he heard more creaking sounds, multiple beds all around him, as if the entire section was full of these impossible, invisible sleepers. He didn't look back. He burst through the emergency exit, triggering the alarm, and didn't stop running until he reached his car. His hands shook so badly he could barely get the key in the ignition. As he pulled out of the parking lot, he made the mistake of looking back at the warehouse. All the windows were dark, just as they should be at midnight. But in one of the upper windows, the one that looked down on the bedroom furniture section, James saw movement. Multiple shapes, all covered in white fabric, all pressed against the glass, watching him leave. James called the police from the road. They searched the warehouse and found nothing unusual. No intruders, no signs of break-in, no explanation for the indented mattresses. But they did find something in the warehouse records that James hadn't known about. The building was a funeral home before it was converted into a warehouse. The section where James had his encounter, that used to be where they kept the bodies before burial. Display beds had been placed right over the spots where the preparation tables had stood. James quit that night. He's done with warehouses, done with night shifts, done with being alone in big empty buildings. He works at a coffee shop now, during the day, with lots of people around. He says he'll never work another night shift as long as he lives, because some places remember what they used to be, and sometimes the past doesn't want to stay buried. I'm Mr. Shadows, and this has been another journey into the darkness. If you've made it this far, if you've listened to these tales and felt that familiar chill run down your spine, then you know what I'm about. Real stories, real fear, real shadows. Subscribe to Mr. Shadows Stories for more tales from the darkest corners of the night. Hit that notification bell because you won't want to miss what's coming next. And if you've got a story of your own, something that happened to you on a night shift, or in an empty building, or in those dark hours when the world feels like a different place, leave it in the comments. Who knows, your story might be the next one I tell. Until next time, remember, the night is long, the shadows are deep, and sometimes the things we fear in the darkness are real. Sweet dreams, if you can sleep at all. This has been Mr. Shadows signing off, but the darkness never signs off. It's always there, always waiting, always watching. See you in the shadows.